Brilliant, thank you. Okie doke, so I will just share my screen. Right, can you see that?
Yes.
Yes, okay, let me share it as a slideshow. There we go. Still seeing it? Brilliant. Okay. So thanks for coming today. It's lovely to see a lot of names on screen, even though I'm not seeing your lovely faces. And this session is about working thematically. So what we're looking to achieve really is looking at the reasons for working thematically, why we express themes as messages, how themes relate to audiences, and how to adopt a thematic approach to your public engagement work. So why should we work thematically? Well, the biggest reason really is because it brings relevance to your audience. Like, it helps them understand why they should be motivated to engage with what you want to communicate with them and what you want to discuss with them. It also helps them to frame the discussion in a way that they can provide an informed perspective and informed response. You know, it's a bit like if you go to a meeting and you've got no idea what the meeting's about, it's really hard for you to give an informed response to that and feel like you're really contributing. You just feel like a bit of an observer. And it's exactly the same with our public engagement work. If we work thematically, we give the audience that context in which they're engaging. It also helps to focus our content as well, and that's really, really important because I think we get very excited about all of the wonderful research that we're doing at the university, but there is so much of it. It's just too much for even academics to take in everything that the university does, but certainly for a wider non-academic public audience, it's just information overload, and that will just cause people to switch off and feel as though it's not really aimed at them, it's not for them, and so they won't engage, certainly not in a meaningful way. So it focuses that content. We don't need to discuss everything all at once. We can, you know, focus on specific bits that are relevant to the audience, so they're relevant to the theme that we're working within. And that's okay to just focus on that, and we can then build the conversation on that foundation to have meaningful engagement with other ideas within a theme at a later date. So again, that really alludes to the accessibility for the audience, really. So themes bring the relevance, and they also limit the amount of content, and they make sure that the content is kind of at a level that the audience can engage with. So again, you know, when you're thinking about what bits you want to focus on as part of your theme, you're thinking about, well, what will the audience have prior knowledge of, what will they have an understanding of, and actually how much more does that need to be broken down for the audience to be able to engage with that in an accessible way. And also just rich data and impact. So through that meaningful engagement, you, like I said, people are able to give their best and most informed response to a discussion. So they're able to bring those diverse perspectives rather than just being a spectator. They're able to be an active participant in that. And when the people feel engaged and they feel like they're part of something, they feel that ownership and that belonging, that's when they kind of commit to kind of changes in their perceptions and behaviour. So again, that's where we can measure impact as well. So themes and messages. So themes, broadly speaking, are concepts. They're those like top line concepts. They are abstract, they are intangible. They can be a bit elusive and obscure sometimes, and sometimes people can find them alienating. But when you're talking about trying to engage with a non-expert audience, or certainly a very broad audience in terms of numbers, you need something that is not niche, because if it's niche, then it's very alienating to a lot of people. So if you have more of a conceptual approach, a thematic approach, it will be more accessible to the broader audience. And for those who might find it a bit confusing, because it's quite intangible and elusive, that's where messaging becomes really important, and how messages tie in with themes is they give it the kind of the concrete facts and the evidence and the examples and the experience and the visual prompts. So the messages make the concepts of the theme real. There are lots of different approaches to thematic planning, but one thematic planning model that I wanted to kind of introduce you to is one created by David Uzzles. So he is a professor of environmental psychology, and came up with this thematic planning model, which looked at kind of audience resources and themes. So thinking about what, in terms of audiences, what are they interested in, what's going to be relevant to them, and then how does that marry with the resources that we have available. So that's our research, that's our stories that the research is telling. Like, so what are the key points of our research and that storyline that is going to be most relevant to audiences. And then the themes is about, he refers to it as kind of managerial messages, but we think about it in terms of institutional messages, really. So what are we as an institution, as a university, trying to communicate? What's a priority for us? What are the stories contained within the research, and then what will be most relevant and interesting and engaging for our audience? And then the type of media that you use to communicate that message is up to you, and kind of sits outside of that thinking, really. So don't get too bogged down in the practicalities of how it gets interpreted. This is the thematics of it. So it'll end up looking like this. You'll have he works in these kind of Venn bubble diagrams, and you start with your central theme message, and that builds out into themes and sub-themes, and then at the end of the sub-themes, that's where your key messaging comes in place, and that can also be referred to as like your storyline, or in our case, research. So we took a thematic approach, and we used David Uzzles' model for the thematic planning for the opening season at the Exchange, which is the air we breathe. So I thought I'd use that as an example of how this can be employed. So we thought about kind of focused on audiences, because we're looking at engaging a really broad audience and a non-expert, non-academic audience at the Exchange, and thinking about what's really relevant to them. So we thought about the consumers of air, like making it really person-centered, like putting that visitor at the heart of our thematics, really. And so what is the impact of the air we breathe on us as consumers of air? And also thinking about the world around us, and how our behaviour, whether that is through what transportation we use, or business practices, or anything like that, how we impact on nature, and how we contribute to climate change. How then nature is left able to regulate our air quality, feeds in there, and then ultimately how the air quality that's left available to us impacts on our physical health, but also how accessing green space impacts on our mental health and well-being. So that's our central theme statement, that whole Venn diagram there. And when we were working through it, I'm taking you through the early iterations of this. So we started off with 5, we worked as a group, and we started off with 5 themes within that, and then we built out those themes to include sub-themes related to them. And we'd done kind of scoping of what resources were available. So we thought about audience, and we knew that climate change and air quality is really important to a lot of people in the general public. That's something that they're going to be very interested in. We're thinking about the resources. So what research did we have available, and what were the kind of stories within that research, and how could that feed into these themes and sub-themes? But again, this is a really good example of why you need to work thematically, because even in this early part of the thematic planning process, it's just overwhelming. There's way too much there, and you couldn't, even as a member of the university community, you can't really get your head around that. So then we kind of went through the process of stripping things back. So we removed several sub-themes that we thought didn't really add enough value to the overall story. They weren't really relevant enough and weren't going to be engaging enough for that public audience. And then a couple of the themes we decided were better placed as sub-themes, so they left as well. So we ended up with a thematic structure that looked like this. So the themes were kind of situated in those overlaps on the main central theme statement. And they were around public health, sustainable futures and air quality, with 3 or 4 sub-themes sitting within each of those themes. And then if you think about the structure that I spoke about for the David Uzzell's approach, so we've talked about theme and then sub-theme, and now we're moving on to that messaging bit, the storyline, the research. So you need messaging for each stage of your thematic structure. So this is what we had for the air we breathe. So and you can see this is how it goes from being very abstract in terms of the air quality as one of the themes. We've also got messaging for the main central theme statement of the air we breathe as well, but just focusing on this one branch, this one thematic branch. You've got air quality, which is really broad, and in and of itself, if you were told that there was an exhibition or event around air quality, that doesn't really give you any detail about what you're going to face when you turn up there. And so how do you know that you want to attend? How do you know it's something that you'll be interested in? How do you know that that's at a level that you'll understand? And why is it worth your while as well? We've all got lives, we're busy. So why is that important to go to? So that's at the more abstract conceptual end. But it's important that that has messaging, because that helps frame what sub-themes are included and what those sub-themes relate to as well. So then there's the messaging within each of the sub-themes of air quality and health, clean air solutions, and our natural surroundings. So again, this gives greater context or greater detail as to what is really being looked at as part of those sub-themes. Because again, if you just think about like, air quality or our natural surroundings, if you just take one element of that thematic structure, you can think, oh, well, what about this bit of research? That's about natural surroundings, but okay, does it relate to air quality? Does it relate to the air we breathe? Is it like a thread that's going to weave throughout the entirety of that thematic structure along that specific branch? And if it's not, then it's not going to be considered really, because it's just not going to be a good fit. There has to be a thread that runs throughout the entire thematic structure for it to make sense to your end audience. So I won't read through all of the messages themselves, because I think you could just get bored hearing me just read things out. But once we'd kind of really understood and had that shared understanding, because what I might see as our natural surroundings might be very different to how somebody else reads that. So the messaging is really important, so that we have that shared understanding to work from as a team, as a team planning a thematic approach. But also then if we have a cohesive and consistent understanding and approach to what each of these themes and sub-themes mean, it will then filter down into how we message and frame and deliver the end activities, and so how it makes sense to the public. And so at the end of the table, after sub-themes, I've just given a few examples of the type of research that was then selected for each of those sub-themes. There are actually quite a few more bits of research under each sub-theme, but there just wasn't space on the slide, so I've just gave an example. So thinking about how you can incorporate a thematic approach to your work. So it can be incorporated in terms of how you design your public engagement activity within individual research projects. So you want to be giving really good thought as to your audience, what your audience want, and in the previous sessions today, how do we find that out? Well, we need to speak to people, so you might want to have some sort of focus groups, you might want to have relationships with kind of community organisations that engage with the audiences that you think might be interested in this, to trial whether actually there is going to be the appetite there to engage with your activity. And that's also something the public engagement team can help with, because we have a lot of existing and continual relationships with different communities across the city and wider region. So when you've thought about who your audience is and what they might be interested in, and you've maybe tested that to be sure that there is the appetite there, then you think about what are the messages that are really key to get across from your research. Like, what do you need to measure in terms of reporting back to your funders, and what do you want to find out as a researcher as well, and then what are the stories, what are the kind of interesting elements of that project that could feed into that audience. So also you can think about creating a series of public engagement activities. I think sometimes there's a really understandable kind of anxiety to stay true to the science and include every bit of detail there, but it just simply won't work. People can't take that in and it won't stay with them. Somebody gave me the example once of if you had a group of 8-year-olds and you wanted to teach them Macbeth, you wouldn't just sit them down and just read it to them and expect them to understand it and leave them with that. You'd have to break that down for them. You'd maybe give it to them in bite-sized chunks. You'd maybe think about changing the language involved. You'd maybe think about even changing maybe the kind of settings involved so that it was a bit more relevant for the kids to engage with. And it's the same with anything else. You really do have to think about what your audience can handle and what they're going to be interested in and what they're going to be able to retain an interest in. If they get bored half through, they'll leave and they won't really hold on to any of the learning from it, because it will have been a very unrewarding experience for them. So even if there was something at the beginning that they engaged with and thought was fascinating, if they leave before the end because they're bored and they feel like actually this isn't for me at all, they leave that lovely bit at the beginning that did interest them. They leave that behind as well. So we really got to think about shaping things in a way that is going to really resonate with that audience throughout the entire piece. So don't worry about leaving some of the detail out and breaking things down and taking it step by step. That's okay. And then that gives you the opportunity to do a series of public engagement activities then. So you've got a whole programme, and maybe the different activities focus on different audiences. So at the exchange, as Laura will be talking about in the other session happening now, we looked at different audience segmentation models used in the cultural and heritage sector, and they're out there and easy to engage with if you're interested, to scale it down to 4 priority groups for the exchange. And that was based on who we thought would have a motivation to engage with the activities that we're going to be doing there. So that was one of them was learning families, another was experience seekers. They're people with no kind of prior knowledge of a subject, and they're kind of looking to come along for the social element, and they're looking to just have fun and enjoy themselves and be social, and if they learn something, great, but that's not the key driving factor. You've also got your knowledge seekers, where they are very comfortable in a kind of cultural and heritage setting. They maybe do have some prior knowledge, and they are coming to learn really, and they want to learn from that single expert voice. And then you have experts as well, and they might be policymakers. I think that's how we traditionally think of them in the universities, like policymakers or academics. But it could also, I mean, the air we breathe in sustainable futures, one of those sub-themes contains the research around hydrogen-powered transport, and so maybe the hydrogen-powered train, that's going to be one of the central features of the exhibit at the Exchange. So train spotters would be a lovely example of experts. They're not necessarily academics, they're not necessarily policy makers, and they're not necessarily even employed in that sector or traditionally qualified in that sector, but the extent of their interest would mean that they do have some quite in-depth knowledge about the subject. And within those segments, you can then think about demographics and key demographics. So you're thinking about your audience, and then what we did was we designed different types of activity for those different audiences. Because again, a bit like, don't try and fit all of your detail, all of your story into one sitting, because it's going to be a bit overwhelming for people. One approach isn't going to fit all, it's just not going to work, and particularly if your target audiences are very different in terms of either their demographics or their motivation to engage, it's just not going to make sense. So for example, if you wanted to engage children as one audience, and then you wanted to engage I don't know, older members of the LGBTQ plus community, they're really different. They're really different people. They've got really different lived experiences. They've got really different perspectives, and they've got really different kind of prior understanding of subjects as well. So the type of activities that you put on would need to be specific to those audiences. That's why the thematic approach really helps enrich all of how we deliver, design and deliver this public engagement activity. Thematic approaches also links different bits of research, cultural or educational projects together as well. And I think it's worthwhile kind of investing in your relationships with colleagues across the university, to think about how your work, you know, I've spoken a lot about research because most of the people that come on these things are researchers or kind of supporting academic colleagues around their research, but it could be educational, it could be cultural, and it's understanding what else is being planned across the university, whether that's within a specific college or whether that's across the different cultural sites, so Barber, Lapworth, Winterbourne or at the Exchange, and thinking about how your work might fit in with that, and whether there's ways that you could adapt your thematic approach to build that kind of links and cohesion with the wider story, again, because that will help reach an audience. Because where there's a rich story, it's not just your perspective, it's not just your bit of work, it's not just your one message. Actually, it's a really rich tapestry of information and perspectives that the audience are coming to. It's just going to be more appealing. So yeah, thinking about how you can build links with colleagues to, you know, do kind of campaigns of research, or to align with thematic seasons at those cultural venues will be really beneficial as well. And that is it for me. So really, it's more just like, does anyone have any questions? And I hope that was okay. Like, I kind of hate these sessions where it's just me talking. I like a bit of back and forth chit chat usually, but this is what we're left with. So try and stop sharing.
So we haven't had much in the, well, we haven't had anything in the chat, so feel free to either unmute or unvideo or put stuff in the, oh, we've got something in the chat. Well, you can probably read that, Holly. So.
Yeah, I can. Did that make sense to everybody? And can you see a link with the work that you do with what I've just discussed? Because if you can't, let's just have a chat about it. Actually, Darren, do you want to stop the recording at this point, just in case that makes people feel a bit more comfortable chatting?
Can't work it out.
Just press stop.